AI isn't just a productivity tool, and it's not simply a threat to jobs. It's a psychological environment, one that is quietly reshaping how we think, lead, decide, and live. And how we engage with it will either compound or erode our most precious forms of wealth: time, energy, attention, and yes, ultimately money. In a world where intelligence is increasingly abundant, but attention is under constant siege, the real question becomes, what actually allows us to flourish? Today on the Flourish Feed podcast, I'm joined by Dr. Jennifer Churchill, someone I've grown alongside over the past several years as we've each come more fully into our life's work. Together, we're going to explore brain capital, leadership, and identity in the age of AI, and why protecting our humanity may be the most important wealth strategy of all. But first, let's get to know Dr. Jenny a little bit. Jennifer is a high-performing psychologist, a lifelong athlete, and a leader who understands viscerally that the mind and body are not separate systems, especially when the stakes are high. Her work sits at the intersection of performance, resilience, and identity shaped by experience in competitive sport, business leadership, and clinical psychology. Now, what sets Jennifer apart is that she doesn't coach from theory. She lives the work. She understands that strength, mental, physical, emotional, it's all personal. You can't outsource it, and you can't fake it. You build by paying attention to how you use your time, protect your energy, steward your attention, and ultimately create real value in your life and work. Her approach is calm. You're going to love her. She's grounded. She's deeply human. She helps leaders build resilience, not by avoiding challenge, but by moving through it with clarity, confidence, and integrity for themselves, their teams, and the lives they're responsible for. Dr. Jenny, welcome to the Flourish Feed podcast.
Well, Gillian, thank you so much for having me. I am so excited about this conversation.
Me too. In the lead up to this conversation, our chats beforehand, I think we've got so many topics to cover today. But to start with, let's talk about your work with leaders. What are you seeing emotionally and psychologically as AI becomes more present in daily work?
Yes. So, what I'm seeing in leaders that I work with is just they're under siege, their attention and their productivity, even though they're using AI, is under siege and under attack. And even though leaders are leaning into AI strategies and optimization and adoption, productivity is actually not improving and their attention is declining. And unfortunately, what that impacts is an erosion of trust. And when we're not attentive, our presence isn't felt, and then trust somewhat evaporates in a lot of dynamics. And so I'm seeing that in various ways throughout an organization, but really with leaders who are leaning into AI heavily, who are using it a lot, and but we're not seeing that be the case.
It's such a fascinating outcome at this stage in the game because you would think that AI would be increasing productivity, but as with many things AI these days, I'm noticing that the thing I think is going to happen is the opposite than what is really happening. And
Mhm.
so here we are. What is it that's causing this psychological shift to a place where there's less trust despite increased technological capability?
Yeah, so unfortunately, what I'm about to talk about is not anything new when it comes to human psychology. It's because when we are under pressure and under stress with anything new or changes happening quickly, our coping mechanisms and our resilience kind of decreases, and then our blind spots become increased. And what I mean by that is, we all have blind spots, and unfortunately, when we're those can increase and then ultimately lead to more derailing behaviors. And then what we're not paying attention to is how we're actually showing up. And so it just depends on your individual unique psychology, which has been trained and developed over a course of a lifetime, and how you're absorbing or understanding the stress that you're putting yourself under physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. It's blind spots actually become more relevant, more evident, and unfortunately, you can't see those very well from, inside the jar.
It's such a contradiction because it is an enabler of greater productivity, but it's like it's stealth. It's
Mm.
cloaking as productivity, and yet it's delivering to us as the human using it. I feel this. Maybe you can feel this. Maybe you can talk about it from a personal perspective. I can tell you from a personal perspective, if I use AI either too frequently or the wrong way, I start to really doubt myself. I feel almost like a dissonance with what is real and what is not real. And I've fought with my AI because I know that what it's telling me is not necessarily true. Is that the kind of thing that's causing this stress, or is it that is there an increased expectation of greater productivity that's causing the stress? Where's the stress coming from?
So there's a few different sources, and it depends on the unique psychology of the individual, and not even just the leaders. We're talking about also tech workers or just workers in your organization. And what happens, so from a leadership perspective, you never really feel caught up. You never are learning something because what you're learning is constantly changing. It's shifting right underneath your feet. And so we touched on this in one of our conversations, Jillian, around the conscious competence model, which is a framework that we have, leveraged over since the 60s around understanding learning in a variety of different professions. And it's, when I'm talking about the anxiety and kind of the pressure, it's people who are using AI. It's actually not the people who aren't using AI, like the LLMs that we're talking about, actively in their workday. It's because when you don't know what you don't have a lot of stress about what you don't know. And then when you move into like more knowledge of what it is that you don't know, that's that stage 2 where you have like conscious incompetence,
Hmm.
right? And then what we're supposed to do from a human learning model and kind of what helps and gives our life meaning is we move into conscious competence, and then the final stage is mastery. But unfortunately, because leaders who are integrating AI are trying to understand how to use it, it's constantly changing, it's advancing, there's different models coming out all the time. What do you use for different things, different tasks in your organization or your operations? And you are stuck between conscious incompetence and conscious competence, which this gap creates that anxiety. And so you just try to learn more and dive in more and it just consumes more time rather than it actually giving you more time. Because productivity by its definition is being able to do more faster in less time. And
Yes.
unfortunately, what we're doing is we're doing more faster, but we're using more time. We're
Yes.
not using less time.
Yes.
And so that's one of the dynamics. But the other piece that is out on HBR today, I was reading it, and they did a study at Berkeley where they 200 plus tech workers in a tech organization. So think tech worker, like they're going to be able to master AI and really show productivity gains. But unfortunately, what happens is they voluntarily, despite being more being a bit more efficient and learning more, they added more to their workday
Yeah.
voluntarily.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what's a common user experience with these LLMs is like you do something so fast, like, oh, I can do more then. We don't actually put standards or parameters or boundaries around ourselves to slow down and to stop. Like, what is enough? And I get into that actually in my podcast, which we'll talk about later. But giving yourself the gift of enough and
Yeah.
understanding what that is helps with a lot of things. So,
You've heard me talk
yeah.
for a long time now about, or maybe you recall, 1,540 minutes every single day. That's what we have to invest. That's the time piece that we have to invest. I'm going to go off script a little bit here
Yeah.
and just say I
Love it.
want to talk a little bit about one of the strategies you've recently started talking about for yourself in how you use that 1440 so that it doesn't all get sucked into increased productivity and increased cognitive load and increased productivity. So talk to us about the 200 miles. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Yes. So I set a goal for myself on February 1st. I never set goals on January 1st. I think it's arbitrary, right? And like it's right after the holidays. Why do we do that to ourselves?
True. It's
So
so
I've
true.
always just like waited till February 1st to set a new goal for myself. But I was noticing that I had been creeping away from something that I love my whole life and not spending enough time do my best thinking. I do my best connection to myself and to God, which is very important to me in my prayer practice. And so I decided to um, set a goal of swimming 200 miles this year, which sounds like a lot, maybe to a non-swimmer, but to a swimmer, like we used to swim 200 miles in a season easily. Again, I'm not 2020 anymore. I'm 50. So it's definitely given me a good mindset challenge and just a new habit to integrate into making sure I'm staying present with my own thoughts and my and connection to myself, which is you can that's the only thing you can do when you're underwater for an hour at a time. And I'm only, obviously a couple of weeks into it, and it's been amazing. It's just given me so much more connection to who I am and remembering parts, honestly, Jillian, that I had forgotten. And so that's what's so awesome. So the 200-mile journey is really about reconnecting to my own thoughts, my critical thinking, ideas that I have under the water. And it's so therapeutic for your body in terms of just the benefits of swimming as well. So I feel very blessed that I'm a swimmer to be able to do it.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I'm doing it, but I also in a world that I'm also using it as a marketing idea, in a world
It
that,
is. Well, it is. And you're really walking out a piece of what we talk about in the Flourish framework, which is making space in your time, energy, attention, and money budget for all the things, right? Not
yes.
just the work identity, which is so prevalent, especially in North American culture. The work identity is very central to who we are. And
Yeah.
now with AI literally affecting everything we touch in our day, it can become all consuming, not to mention the whole social media industry as a time taker in our life. So the fact that you've carved out and made a story of the 200 miles, I think is just marvelous. Um, I want to jump to another term that you used yesterday, which was cognitive debt. And now
Yes.
I feel like what you're doing in the pool is probably restoring that cognitive debt
Yes.
because you're giving yourself space to not necessarily be cognitively plugged in and running at 100 miles an hour. But tell
Um,
us a little bit more about the cognitive debt piece and how that fits into the proper and maybe unhealthy uses of AI.
yes. So cognitive debt is essentially the lack of using your cognitive power when you any kind of knowledge task or kind of any kind of intellectual task. And when we hand it off to someone else to do, like technology, then we're not exercising those neural pathways that allow ourselves to create cognitive reserve, which in the pool, weightlifting, I mean, that helps cognitive reserve. So it's not just about when we're working that things that affect our cognitive reserve or our debt. But if we hand off more and more of our cognitive tasks to technology and AI, then we're creating what's called cognitive debt. We're not as critical thinking as we normally are. We can't come up with our own ideas as easily or as frequently, write as well on our own as well anymore. And because we're not being forced to do the task on our own and first before leveraging AI as a tool. And so what that does is it creates a debt in our neural pathways and our cognitive reserve, which we have to refuel, we have to replenish with something. And that's our own thinking, our own interactions, our own connection, and our own health practices. But what they observed research was that long after someone stopped using the AI in the study, the cognitive debt did not bounce back right away. It didn't it the cognitive skill didn't bounce back right away. It took time. Yes, and so it's just like something we're training our cognition to be weak. Really,
Hmm.
simply, it's like weight training. So when we don't do it, we have to work our way back up to where we were before. And
Wow.
for people in leadership roles who are typically in a midlife time in their life frame, especially for women, we need to be protecting our cognitive reserve and our cognitive strength like it is our lifeline, because without our memories later in life, we don't have a whole lot of meaning in
No
life.
kidding. And it should be the thing that we are accumulating and it's getting stronger and richer and more depth, not less depth in terms of the reserve that we can draw on as we go. Now, I remember back when I first met you and you were working on coaching women in menopause and we often talked about women's increased neurological vulnerability, which you just touched on a second ago. But why is this conversation so urgently gendered? What is it about women in particular, where the use of AI has to be so carefully considered?
Well, no, not just for women. I should note that brain health or like early onset dementia or Alzheimer's actually is not a disease. It's not a disease of aging. It's a disease that actually begins in our 30s if we're not taking care of our brain in a way. So let me just think through this a little bit before I keep talking because I want to get the data right. So things that we do in our 30s and our 40s will impact our long-term brain health, and we can reverse it lot of cases that can be reversed, but there are some that if we're not careful, we don't necessarily have to end up with early onset dementia and Alzheimer's if we're taking care of our whole system in the right way. And so for women, that system includes estrogen. We have various, experiences, transitions throughout our life where estrogen fluctuates wildly. And it's, Dr. Mosconi, who writes a lot about brain health for women, she came up with the three Ps. We go through puberty, pregnancy, and perimenopause. And every single one of those Ps in a woman's life rewires and reshapes our brain. And it never really returns to the state that it was before because it's meant to our brains are meant to serve a specific role and purpose in our life to becoming mature, and then our brain evolves and becomes children. So our brain is never the same again after having children, and then it's never the same once we go through perimenopause. And unfortunately, 100% of women will go through perimenopause into menopause, and the symptoms are wildly different. But unfortunately, a lot of the symptoms that we can't see or feel often are the ones that are the most dangerous for us, and that is around our brain health. And many women will experience what's called brain fog and things like that, hot flashes. That's related to cardiovascular health. But if we are, so our brain health is already compromised because of the drastic roller coaster our hormones are on through perimenopause into menopause. And estrogen is a neuroprotective hormone. I mean, we have estrogen receptors all over our bodies. And it's not, it's not just in one part of our, body. It's the
Anatomy, yeah.
our skin changes, our hair changes, all of it. And it's an anti-inflammatory hormone. So it protects inflammation in the brain, which can correspond with memory loss and early onset dementia and Alzheimer's. There's lots of variables that go into it, but when we are already at risk, if we are not protecting our brain strategically with the use of AI and protecting ourselves from more cognitive debt,
Yeah.
then we are putting ourselves at more risk to not remember our life later in life. And it's a horrible disease. I mean, I think the number one fear people have in life is not death, it's actually losing their memory. And so it's not remembering the life that you lived. And so when we introduce a tool like AI that takes over those neural pathways that we need to be exercising and pumping and strengthening on our own, then we aren't we're further compromising our capacity.
So can you walk us through whether it's a high performing woman or a high performing man? We've definitely got the point about the neuroprotective nature of how we need to do this as women, but walk us through an example of how to use any AI in a healthy way and a not healthy way. Can you
Yes.
give us I know that's kind of your bailiwick, and I don't want to take away all the thunder of working with Dr. Jenny, but give us an example.
I mean, I have so many. So let me just discern the type of AI that we're talking about because AI exists in a lot of many forms, and I love AI for working for me behind the scenes while I'm not even at my computer. You can set up AI systems and automations that actually do save yourself time, which, I spent the last year learning in my AI mastermind how to do that. And those are the things that I go all in on how to figure that out because then, using AI in the ways that are actually really productive. And so the way that we're talking about that can actually hinder our cognitive resilience is using the large language models to outsource our creative thinking, our strategic thinking, and our all those cognitive tasks that are if we lose those, then we're just not competitive in the workplace anymore either, right?
You're
And
also saying, "I don't need my memories because I don't." Honestly, like, that kind of is like the evolutionary
yeah,
joke of it all is you're saying, "I
yeah,
have outsourced this, therefore I don't need it." How
yeah,
wild is that? But
yeah.
anyway, I interrupted you.
No, it's okay, and this is where I might get in trouble with my coach Callan a little bit because she really sits on the from the place of AI first, and I'm really human think first, then AI. And so when I work with a leader, the first thing I try to understand is like in especially if they're internal in an organization where adoption is this huge kind of like nebulous thing that people still aren't getting right. The client, I'll give you an example of, she's 2 down from from the global CEO of a large Fortune 100 energy company, and they're just kind of being asked to use AI. And this is a huge
Period.
organization.
Yeah.
To
Just
say, like,
use it.
"Here, you have the tool, we're giving you a license internally, use the tool." And they have these options for training, but they're not strategically implemented, um, they're not.
Not considering the cognitive resilience or debt that it's going to create, it sounds
Well,
like.
and we're, like, what we're talking about, Jillian, that organizations are talking entrepreneurs, we're having these conversations, but large organizations, I mean, there's a really good conversation at Davos that I was able to watch with a lot of leaders in terms of AI and what it means for their organizations, but no one's really talking about the cognitive impact or the emotional and mental toll of the tool in the organizations. And so when I work with an individual leader one-on-one, I simply try to understand how they're using it first, because what I don't wanna do is have them feel like they aren't smart enough to have figured this out on their own, and so I will gently understand, try to how they use it, and ultimately, they're using it, like, for tasks, like, "Please write an email response to this email," and oftentimes not editing it and just sending it.
Mm.
While and then that can lead to a lot of mistrust because people would see it's been written by AI. And so I'll work with them on how to create kind of a project, or in Claude, it's called a project. In ChatGPT, it's a custom GPT, and Microsoft Copilot, it's called an agent. And you build this project that is uniquely your own thinking first, and you write a draft yourself of anything before you have AI refine it.
Mm.
And the elements that go into creating these projects, it's pretty in depth, but you give your AI a role. You always give your AI a role and or a character of like, be John Maxwell, the number one, leadership coach in the world. And then you give it the context of what you're going to be, working on together. You give them the ask. I have added another layer of, and I want you to only go back and forth with me 2 or 3 times before you tell me stop, go do your own thinking and come up with your own decision here. You never give the decision making power to the AI. And then you always have it ask you for clarifying questions before you begin, because then it's like it's engaging your own thinking. And so there's a whole way that you can start a conversation or a project or anything with your AI from that perspective. And that's a really kind of fast, not very in-depth description of how I begin working with people around it, but it's just one step that goes into the deeper conversation of how they're using it. And when I work with that leader, I ask them, how does it feel to have this, I get into more of that kind of experiential conversation with them
Yeah.
around
Well, you talked
AI.
about psychological safety yesterday being such an important part of how we walk this out.
Yes, yes, because if you're, let's say you communicate to your team, send in been written by AI and not edited at all, then trust goes down quite a bit. And then when you don't have that trust, your psychological safety in an organization just really declines. And then also you have the whole other element of confidentiality of like what, if you're recording things, if you are using AI and inputting someone's perspective into the AI, do you have their permission? And really creating standards and parameters with your team around how you as a leader will use AI, how they can use it, how you use it as a team, because having those clear discussions and expectations with each other helps kind of restore and repair trust if it's ever been broken, or protect trust from being broken. Because without psychological safety in a world in that everyone knows everyone's just using AI, you're not even sending me your own thoughts anymore, then we don't have any connection. We don't have a
Well, the flip side
relationship.
of that too in the role that you play with organizations and leaders, the flip side of that is we have an opportunity to create psychological safety
Yes.
by defining these things that no one else
Yes.
is defining, right? They're
Yes.
saying, here's an AI, go use it. And a lot of us work in organizations where that's the case. And thank goodness they're embracing it. They're saying, go ahead. They're not preventing it like they are in some school systems, which we can talk about at another time. But we have this opportunity as with my small team here, for example, we've only recently in the last 6 months began to use it in a way that affects our day-to-day life. But you
Mhm.
can tell when it's not being used right because the thing it's generating is so poor that it must have been right out of the gate. And
Yeah.
that becomes a rule in our little culture of our little team that wasn't how we want to use it. So I love that you're in a kind of driver's seat for creating some of these rules because the institutions or organizations generally aren't. And I have to say, the people making the AI, they don't necessarily want to talk about how it's going to cause cognitive debt, right? They're not going to give you the playbook or the rule book. They just want everybody to use it, however good or bad it is for their health. So that's very, very interesting. Now, what happens to identity
Mm.
when this mastery feels impossible? When this
Mm.
you talked earlier about the ground shifting under us because it's constantly
Mhm.
improving and changing and what AI can do for us is constantly changing. What
Yeah.
happens to our own sense of identity when this feeling of mastery feels impossible?
Yeah. So, it's such a great question. Well, it's compromised. I mean, really simply, right? It's because we as a human species want to feel like we have like something like there's different forms of meaning. So let me I guess tease apart meaning and purpose a little bit here because purpose is really what drives you towards a goal and it's very action oriented. Meaning is so much more than what we do. And meaning is really about who we are just as a human and not what we do. And so what we do can give us meaning, but I remind my clients all the time, well, and not even just my clients, myself, which is why I'm swimming 200 miles, is I am so much more than my, coaching practice, my work, a daughter, I'm a loved sister, I'm an auntie, those things are the most important thing to me. And in my health and being able to care for those people long into my life, that's priority. And so when I think about that's what gives my life meaning more than anything. That's what I would love to have if people took anything away from this conversation. I want people to know that they are more than what they do, that like AI will never be able to take away their story and it is uniquely theirs. And that's what meaning means. But unfortunately, we do work really hard to achieve in our world. We love to achieve. I do too. And that gives us a sense of identity in addition to meaning. I think meaning and identity are a little bit different in that way, is that we, when you think of identity, people can identify you as that coach. People can identify because they don't know everything else about you, right? So they identify you as a psychologist or a wealth, expert. And it's so what contributes to that identity, that perceived identity externally and internally is kind of shifting underneath us,
Mhm.
then we become a little bit more fragile in terms
No
of our
kidding.
identity. And
Well, because we're
so
always evolving, but I think we are being asked to evolve in our relatedness to this tool. We're being
yes,
asked to evolve to make sure that we're like dirty dancing, no spaghetti arms, like we're holding a space between us and the thing because it can become very easy, I think, at this stage anyway, for us to be consumed by the thing, for us to
yes.
that we become the tool instead
Mhm,
of
mhm.
we are the master of the tool.
Yeah,
I want to talk a little bit about that relatedness and that humanity because that's such a
yes,
big part of your practice. And you
yes.
mentioned when we spoke earlier about it was either an article or I think it was an article from World Economic Forum that talked about
Mhm.
top skills in the years
Yeah,
ahead
yes,
and how surprising they are because
yeah,
they're not necessarily all technological. Can you tell us a
yeah.
little bit about that?
Yes, only 3 out of the 10 top skills that will be needed by 2030 are technology skills. The other 7 are human skills, critical thinking, strategic thinking, creative, like relationship building, the ability to build trust. I don't have the exact list right in front of me, but
Right, but they all sound like the kind of thing that if you're using AI all day long the wrong way, you're gonna lose those things.
Yes, it's amazing. I mean, and we know the thing is what's great is we know this, but it's a good reminder that are we are not we are not necessarily we can't be fully threatened by these machines and this technology because there's something that will never be able to be replaced within us and that's our ability to have a real conversation with another human that is unpredictable. Like I love the idea know what someone is going to respond back to me with. And when you look at the different LLMs, it's pretty predictable because it's based on patterns. It's implemented pattern by humans at this point. And I know the agents are learning from each other now, but I would say that relatedness piece is so important also for the mental health and well-being of our society, our culture, our world, especially leadership roles, which are already pretty lonely. You
Mm.
know,
Mm.
isolation in leveraging this tool alone in isolation can actually increase our feeling of being alone.
Yes.
We know that isolation, I know you know this in your practice as well, is that connection and real relationships our well-being long term. And it's those real human connections. And because we have to protect our young kids who are growing up with this, they're feeling more and more alone. And we are
Mhm.
looking to us to model this as leaders, as their parents, that we can the phone can be in the other room and you're going to be better for it.
No kidding. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
So,
I mean, it's interesting. I have a very small sample size of people that I refer to in my life, but I am noticing that the appetite and the trust to engage with AIs and the future vision of us even having humanoid AIs as part of our life, for certain generations, they're gung ho. They're very excited about it. And other generations, interestingly, my kids who are in their teens, they're made most nervous by this. And I estimate it's because they recognize they're the ones who have the longest that they are going to have to live that way if it doesn't turn out
yeah.
very well. But I
Yeah.
wonder, regardless of how we get there or what it looks like, you mentioned earlier this ritual that you have of using AI for automating certain things to give you more time to be more human. And I loved the sound of that. I wondered if there were other rituals you either currently have or you even imagine as we increase the level of AI and automation in our life that you've imagined that would make your ability to serve even greater? Like, what are the rituals that you've got, and then where could that go?
Yeah. So the rituals that I have is that, my e my inbox and my schedule management and kind of my organization of everything that I work on is just kind of managed and organized in the backdrop and using work now. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's native to your computer and it runs as basically a little bit of you give it a role and it will do whatever you want it to with what's native on your computer. And so I've automated quite a few things that I used to do personally. I still check it every now and then, because it does make mistakes. Like that's the thing. You need to do a human pulse check on these things. And so I give it explicit instructions to not permanently delete anything, save it somewhere where I can go review it later when I have time. It's so I have that working in the backdrop for me right now. And you can automate like when I do podcast interviews on my own channel that you can automate editing, clip management, all of that things, writing your notes. Like I have specific things that I just kind of hand over, but it's also like a heavy editing kind of production lift that I don't have to necessarily do or pay someone to do anymore. And so those are the things that I use now. I would say, I don't have anything that I've been imagining just because, my life and my business is pretty simple and I don't have a huge team either. It's just really me and my clients and a couple contractors that work with me. And so I think it's a really beautiful question to kind of imagine
I can leave you with that one. I think
Yes,
what you just said though about roles and being very clear about describing the rules for those roles and the standard operating procedure by which an agent will work for you is so contrary to what we've allowed tech to become in our everyday. And it's interesting that AI, hopefully for the creatives and the ones who really wield it in a healthy way, we're going to be asked to go back to that place where we are very clear about what we want it to do. Because if we don't, I think that's when the mindset and the imagination of it going haywire can really take root in someone's imagination. Does that make sense? Like, we got
absolutely.
to stay in charge of it. And the way that you talk about it, how it's almost like they're people in your life, but they're not quite people in your life, but you've given them roles and you described the job description for each of those AIs in your world. And I think that is a healthy way to walk forward. And it sounds like it's a way that's also allowing you to remain cognitively resilient. Is that kind of safe to say?
Yes. I mean, yes. So I hand over a lot of the and kind of my production tasks to Claude Cowork. I'm not sponsored. This just
You'd
happens to
like
be
to
the
be.
one yeah, it's just the one I love, but the I have, so I do have a new ritual that I just implemented actually in the last couple months. I use a word processor. I don't even use my computer when I sit down to write something for the first time. So I don't have tabs up. It's not connected to the to the web, to the internet. It's called a free write, and it's just a little word processor. I get out first thing in the morning, and I just do my own writing.
That's brilliant.
And
That's almost like a dumb phone, right?
it
Like,
is.
I don't even know what a word processor is.
Yeah, I grew up with word processors in college, and it's just like it's kind of like a electronic typewriter, and this one backs up to, a little thing in the cloud, that way then when I'm ready to go and edit it,
You can
I
pull
can
it down
access
somewhere
it.
else. Yeah.
But, you know, when you think about the creative process, we we've had these computers where we've been writing, you know, since they've been created for I don't know how many decades now. And we go back between creative and analytical thinking, and people jump from writing to editing, and writing and editing, it uses different parts of the brain rather than staying in your creative space and your creative zone. And since implementing that, so this is a new ritual that has nothing to do with AI actually. I'm
Kind of
completely
anti-AI, really. It's pro-human.
it's pro-human and it's pro my brain and my own creative thinking, and that's how I write first, and then I will, you know, refine it a little bit, but I tell you what, most of my favorite, content pieces, I don't polish, I don't edit, I just upload. Like, I'm writing things on Substack now, and those are the ones that people most because people can feel you.
Gosh, how cool is that? That's the biggest takeaway I've had from this conversation is to get a word processor
Yes.
because it's so tempting to go and that's the cognitive switching piece, which is going
Yep,
back and forth between writing something
yep,
and then editing it or writing something and then fact checking it or writing something and sharing it with the AI to see what they think. I
yep.
love that idea.
Yeah, and you know the cost, Jillian, of task switching, you
It's
know,
awful.
context switching. It's awful. It slows us down. So I get so much more done before I get on any of my connected devices. It's awesome. I
It's
love it.
brilliant. It
Yeah.
leads me to the question about another term you brought up yesterday, which I think you said was related to a McKinsey study, but I might be misquoting, and that was brain capital.
Yeah. No,
And
it's
I think that's
McKinsey.
your way. Is that a way of growing your brain capital for those 7 skills that we really, really need by 2030?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about the study around brain capital.
Yeah. So McKinsey just came out in January with great on the prediction of brain capital being one of the biggest boosts to our economy actually by 2050, in the sense that like I think like the number is because I want to get this right. I don't want to misquote this number, but it's something like it's multiple trillions of dollars to the GDP. Is that right? GDP. And I can find that for you here in a second, but
Yeah.
it's the brain capital and the brain economy is what they also talk about is being able to protect our brain health and investing in activities that make sure we are taking care of our brain health and the impact on our economy is huge in the sense that
Mm.
decreased cost due to lost productivity or sickness or, you know, less there's fewer deaths if we invest in our brain capital. And it's not just at leadership levels, it's also for our children and our young adults. where we're investing in their mental health as well. And there's the physiological impact and investment of our brain capital as well, how we take care of our bodies. Healthier leaders are better leaders. And so we know that with so much research. And so they're saying something in a new, unique way that is tied to this prediction of real economic value for our world and well,
I would love to include the link to that article in the show notes. Yeah,
yep,
that would be great.
it is saying what I've always believed. When we invest in our health and then ultimately our brain, then we not only are better leaders in the moment, we're protecting our futures. And ultimately, what that does is it impacts our economic, health as well.
Yep, yeah, I'm with
Yeah.
you, girl. That's one way
Yeah.
that you and I have always gotten along
Yeah.
is the belief in the systems integration between the
Yes.
mind and the body and anything that we can do or be.
Yes.
I want to ask you now about the private podcast series. I'm
Sure.
so intrigued by this and I'm so intrigued that I'm going to sign up and I'm going to join because I need to try this out. I've never done this before. Tell us about it. What is it about? What are you
Yeah.
aiming to do with it?
Yeah, so the private podcast is it's exactly what it says. It's private. It's not going to be a publicly published podcast. You get a unique link to it, and it is 9 total episodes on how to use AI without anxiety. And ultimately, it walks you through mental health and well-being around how you use AI, but then it goes into the brain health, which we've been talking about a lot here, protecting our memories, protecting our futures, but then also how do you lead your team through AI? And then also how you set standards and parameters for yourself. So a lot of what we've talked about today is in this podcast because everything that we've been talking about kind of increases our you know our like it triggers our nervous system a little bit, right?
It sure does.
And it amplifies, like, the undercurrent of our anxiety that we kind of all live with day to day,
Well, and I
right?
think when
And
you're more productive, you're going to need more recovery. So if you are
yes,
operating at a higher level, you've got to fit in this other human
yeah,
stuff that is pure animal recovery.
yes, yes, and so I chose a podcast, audio only on purpose because I don't wanna be talking about attention and taking care of your brain and not being distracted with another screen in front of you. On the go, and it just links to this technology is amazing. It just links to the podcast app that you already use. So either Apple Podcast or Spotify or Overcast, whatever it is that you use, you get an RSS feed and then it just links it right into your ears or in your car when you're in carpool lane or whatever it is, and you can be listening to different it's really my thesis around how to integrate AI in a healthy way into your
Yeah.
life, personally
Yeah.
and professionally.
I think it's
And
marvelous. Yeah,
yeah.
now the types of people that you've already seen attracted to this, obviously leaders, the type that you coach. Is there a demographic that's surprising you that is interested in AI that you didn't see coming?
Not really. I mean, I think that, you know, it's interesting because people I there's so many I mean, it's such a broad spectrum, right? I'm in this AI mastermind levels of AI anxiety and trying to keep up and learning new things all the time, right? And they're masters at AI in a lot of ways, but then it keeps shifting. And then I have clients who don't use AI at all, but they want to understand what it might be doing to their team members when if they're using it and or understanding it in terms of like one of my clients who she said my son came home from school and he used AI at school to to help him negotiate the fact that he wants a pet turtle. And, like, it's scripted out how to ask for it, and she's like, how do I get my head around that?" And so I
What
think
did
it
you tell her? Did you tell her he needs to learn how to negotiate on his own? Because I would totally not take it if it came from an AI.
she was more she thought it was really clever.
Yeah, it's
So,
true.
she's one of these early users that is kind of using it really, in a but now she is because I've given her ways to, like, create a project and how to put parameters and boundaries around it as well, and how to talk to her team about it. But so in terms of, the type of leader who's drawn to this is really anyone in an executive role or especially an entrepreneur, because
A
entrepreneurs,
founder role, yeah.
we just wanna learn everything that might be impacting what the world is doing, right? And so that's what AI is doing to us. So it's really that high level leader who's using AI and maybe not even understanding how it's impacting their well-being.
Their health, for sure.
You know, you may or may not be aware that it's causing you some anxiety, or really the through line through all the episodes is identifying different types of blind spots and how they show up, with your leadership and or for yourself and how you talk to yourself as well. So it's a transformation experience, this
Amazing.
podcast, and it's just kind of like it's kind of just one thread of like what I've been doing for 20 years, you know? It's all about psychology and well-being and meaning and how we are
And how we
taking
show up.
care
Yeah.
and how we show up and take care of ourselves in the
Yeah.
process.
Well, and I think back to what you were talking about with the brain capital and that study, talking about so many trillions of dollars coming from a brain economy. It's going to come from a brain economy because we've held the boundary and because
Yes.
we've mastered the way to be human and leverage the tool. It's not going to be a brain driven economy. There won't be one if we're using it wrong, right? We're
Right,
just going to become like, as I always
right.
say, the people in Wall-E in the Steven Spielberg film who are just floating around looking at movies all day long, which I'm sure there will be a segment of the population that does that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for the creative leaders out there like you and I, we need tools like the ones you're talking about. That's brilliant. In closing
Yeah.
today, I have one question that I ask every guest this season, and it has to do with those 1,440 minutes every single day. I call it the moment of bliss question. So it's a minute or two that you notice happens once in a while, or you maybe even seek it out every single day that lights up your heart, gives you
Mm.
joy, makes you feel free. Dr. Jennifer Churchill, what's your moment of bliss?
Well, I tell you what, when I wake up and I walk downstairs and see my dog, I call her a puppy, but she's gonna be 10 on Sunday, and I see her wagging her tail, and she's just so excited to see me, like, that is my daily moment of
Moment of
bliss,
bliss.
because it's just a good reminder of the simple things that matter, right? And
Yeah.
yeah,
That's my moment of bliss too. I told this a long time ago in one of the earlier episodes that it has to do with at the time she was my puppy. She still is. She's just a little over a year old. But every morning she gets in the car with me and we drive to get a coffee. And
yeah,
I see the world through her eyes at
yeah,
6:30 in the morning. And
yes,
that is my moment of bliss. I'm looking
yeah,
out the eyes of a labradoodle and
yeah,
everything is great. And
yes,
that kind of sets me up.
yeah,
Thank you
yeah,
so much for
my
sharing with
goodness.
us today how to protect our attention. You are the attention master. This is the attention episode. You've given us so much to think about stewarding our energy and anchoring our identity, not in the tech, but in the human and using it. So thank you so much. I look forward to flourishing with you for so many years.
Yes,
And I
likewise.
hope you have the most wonderful day.
Oh my goodness, thank you, Jillian, so much.